Welcome to Bad Day HQ, where today we're counting down the biggest airplane disasters in history. As a foreword, we will not be including the 9/11 attacks in this list. Although nearly 3,000 people perished, the planes themselves had relatively few people on board, and most lives were lost when the towers collapsed rather than directly from the plane's impact. Number 10. American Airlines Flight 191. On May 25, 1979, the American Airlines Flight 191 was taking off from the Chicago O'Hare Airport when, shortly after leaving the runway, the left engine peeled off the wing and came crashing to the ground. It caused the hydraulic lines to rupture, and just 31 seconds into their flight, the airliner plummeted into a nearby field. The crash and ensuing explosion killed all 271 passengers and crew, as well as 2 people on the ground. The tragic loss was attributed to improper maintenance and remains, as of when this video is published, the deadliest aircraft accident in the United States. Number 9. Iran-Ilyushin IL-76. There's still a lot of mystery surrounding our number 9 pick. The military plane Ilyushin IL-76 was carrying members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps on February 19, 2003, when it crashed into the mountains near one of the most populated cities in Iran. The official report claims that bad weather brought the aircraft down. However, many things don't add up. The number of bodies found was far more than should have been on that aircraft, leading many to suspect the incident was a collision with another airliner, and the terrorist organization, the Abu Bakr Brigades, have claimed responsibility for the crash. We may never know what happened. Number 8. Iran Air Flight 655. In the last months of the Iran-Iraq War, the civilian airplane, Flight 655 of Iran Air, was flying its usual passenger route when 2 missiles from the United States naval ship, the USS Vincennes, plunged into the plane, bringing it down. The Pentagon claimed the ship was acting in self-defense, as it had misidentified the aircraft as an F-14 Tomcat and tried to radio the airliner on both military and civilian frequencies with no response. Iran, however, disputes this claim, as 655 used signaling specific to civilian vessels. In 1996, the United States government agreed to pay $61.8 million to the families of the 290 victims, but did not admit legal liability or apologize. Number 7. Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. On the 17th of July, 2014, during the war in Donbass, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was shot down near the Ukraine-Russian border. All 283 passengers and 15 crew members were killed. Strangely, immediately following the crash, a post appeared on social media by the leader of the Donbass separatist militia claiming responsibility for shooting down a Ukrainian AN-26 military aircraft. However, later that day, the post was removed and the separatists then denied having the skills or technology to bring down any plane at that altitude. Number 6. Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 163. On August 19, 1980, the world's deadliest aviation accident that did not involve a crash took place. A fire broke out in the baggage compartment of Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 163 just a few minutes after takeoff. Smoke billowed through the plane as it burned through the baggage compartment and into the passenger cabin. The plane returned to the airport safely, but the captain decided to taxi off the runway instead of immediately stopping and evacuating. Unable to open the pressurized doors by the time the plane stopped, all 301 people on board died of smoke inhalation before the rescue crews could even reach them. Number 5. Air India Flight 182. At the Toronto airport on June 23, 1985, a passenger, Mr. M. Singh, checked in on Air India Flight 182. Mr. Singh never actually boarded his flight, but his suitcase did. When the airliner was over the coast of Ireland, the bomb in his suitcase went off. All 329 passengers and crews lost their lives, and Mr. Singh was never identified or captured. It was later determined that Sikh extremists were behind the bombing as a retaliation for the Indian government's attack on the Golden Temple spiritual shrine. The only person convicted was Inderjit Singh Rayat for assembling the bomb, and he was released in 2017. Number 4. Turkish Airlines Flight 981. Turkish Airlines Flight 981 left France bound for London on March 3, 1974. Shortly after takeoff, the cargo door detached, causing explosive decompression. The floor collapsed, severing the control cables to the elevators, the rudder, and the No. 2 engine, and shrapnel flew out the door. The plane lost control and dove so steeply and quickly that it disintegrated upon impact. Rescue teams recovered over 20,000 body fragments, but were still unable to identify all 346 people on board. Number 3. Charki Dadri mid-air collision. On the 12th of November 1996, Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907 was cruising through the skies outside of Delhi when it collided with Saudi Arabian Flight 763. The Kazakh pilot was flying lower than his assigned clearance altitude when the two planes hit. Everyone aboard both aircraft died, making it the world's deadliest mid-air collision with 349 casualties. In the aftermath, the civil aviation authorities in India made it mandatory for all aircraft flying in and out of India to be equipped with a traffic collision avoidance system, which has now been adopted worldwide and has saved countless lives. Number 2. Japan Airlines Flight 123. Japan Airlines Flight 123 had been in an accident back in 1978 where its tail had been damaged, but unfortunately was not repaired properly by Boeing. 7 years later, on August 12, 1985, just a few minutes after takeoff from Tokyo, the repair finally failed, and explosive decompression ripped the tail off the plane and ruptured the hydraulics. The pilots kept the plane stable for 32 minutes before eventually crashing into a mountain. The Japanese military assumed there would be no survivors and delayed visiting the scene until the next morning. Only then did they realize the horrible mistake they had made. Medics determined that many passengers did not die from the crash, but from shock and exposure, meaning they could have survived if medical personnel had gotten to the scene immediately. Only 4 of the 524 people on board were rescued, making this the deadliest single aircraft disaster in history. Number 1. Tenerife Disaster. On March 27, 1977, a bomb went off at the primary airport for the Canary Islands, causing many flights to be diverted to a small airport on the nearby island of Tenerife. With so many planes in such a small area, the taxiway was blocked, forcing aircraft to taxi directly on the runway. In the midst of all this, a thick fog rolled onto the island, drastically reducing visibility for the pilots. The captain of a large KLM Flight 4805 thought he had been cleared for takeoff and began speeding down the runway for liftoff, directly towards Pan Am Flight 1736. After hearing the radio communication and being unable to reach KLM, Pan Am was desperately trying to taxi out of the way when the crash occurred. The impact and resulting fire killed everyone aboard the KLM flight and most of the occupants of the Pan Am airliner. In total, 583 people lost their lives that day, and the disaster has influenced the industry greatly by showing the importance of training, standardized phraseology, and ground radar at all airports. What disaster did you find most interesting? Let us know in the comments below, and also tell us what other top 10s you'd like to see us tackle in the future here at Bad Day HQ.